Sarah hummed, unlocking her apartment door. Long day, she tossed her keys on the table. The aroma of her forgotten dinner lingered. She sighed, exhaustion settling in. A shower, then sleep. That's all she wanted. Water cascaded down, washing away the day's stress. Steam filled the small bathroom, creating a warm, foggy cocoon. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the hot water soothe her tired muscles. She had been looking forward to this moment all day. The gentle patter of water was almost hypnotic, a welcome escape from the chaos of her daily life. Suddenly a floorboard creaked outside. Sarah's eyes snapped open. She paused, listening intently. Silence. Must be the building settling, she thought, trying to reassure herself. But the unease was hard to shake off. She went back to her shower, but the sense of being watched lingered, prickling at the back of her mind. She turned off the shower and wrapped herself in a towel, her movements slow and deliberate. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, and she could have sworn she saw a shadow move outside. Heart pounding, she stepped out of the bathroom, her eyes scanning the dimly lit hallway. It was empty, but the eerie atmosphere made her skin crawl. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Maybe it was just her imagination, but the feeling of being watched was hard to ignore. Towel wrapped tight, Sarah stepped out of the bathroom. The steam from her hot shower still lingered in the air, creating a thin mist that clung to the mirrors and tiles. She felt a momentary warmth envelop her, a stark contrast to the chill that awaited her outside the bathroom door. She took a deep breath, savoring the last bit of warmth before stepping into the cold hallway. Freezing air hit her, raising goosebumps. The sudden drop in temperature was like a slap to her senses, making her shiver uncontrollably. She wrapped the towel tighter around her body, trying to preserve the fleeting warmth. Her breath came out in visible puffs, a testament to the cold that had invaded her apartment. She glanced around, puzzled by the unusual chill. The apartment door hung open. Her heart hammered in her chest. Panic began to set in as she realized the door should have been locked. She had always been meticulous about securing her home. The sight of the open door sent a wave of dread washing over her. She took a hesitant step forward, her mind racing with possibilities. Had someone broken in? Was there still someone inside? Hello? Her voice echoed in the empty space. The silence that followed was deafening, amplifying her fear. She strained her ears, listening for any sign of movement. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic outside. She called out again, her voice trembling. "Is anyone there?" The echo of her own voice was her only reply. A dark figure emerged from the shadows. He was tall, face obscured by a ski mask. The sight of him sent a jolt of terror through her. He moved with a predatory grace, his eyes locked onto hers. She could see the glint of something metallic in his hand, catching the dim light. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her body was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. Fear choked her. Before she could scream, a hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her cry. The pressure was firm, unyielding, and she could feel the rough texture of the glove against her lips. Her eyes widened in terror as she struggled to breathe. The world around her seemed to blur, her vision narrowing to the dark figure looming over her. She fought to break free, but his grip was too strong. The last thing she saw before everything went black was his cold, unfeeling eyes staring back at her. He dragged her, the scent of stale cigarettes filling her nostrils. The room was dimly lit, shadows dancing on the walls as the smoke from his cigarette curled upwards, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. She could barely make out the details of the room, but the overwhelming sense of dread was unmistakable. The man's grip on her arm was tight, his fingers digging into her flesh, leaving marks that would surely bruise. She tried to resist, but her strength was no match for his. The sound of her own breathing was loud in her ears, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that enveloped them. Her apartment, her safe space, now a prison. The once familiar surroundings now felt alien and threatening. The cluttered apartment, with its dark corners and hidden shadows, seemed to close in on her. Every piece of furniture, every picture on the wall, now felt like a part of her captivity. She had always felt safe here, but now the very walls seemed to mock her helplessness. The fear in her eyes was palpable, a stark contrast to the comfort she once felt in this space. She could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the oppressive silence. He bound her hands, the rope biting into her skin. The rough texture of the rope chafed against her wrists, each movement causing a fresh wave of pain. She could feel the fibers digging into her flesh, a constant reminder of her captivity. The knots were tight, expertly tied, leaving no room for escape. She tried to wriggle her hands free, but the more she struggled, the tighter the ropes seemed to become. The floor was cold and hard beneath her, adding to her discomfort. She could feel the chill seeping into her bones, making her shiver uncontrollably. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the blood from the cut on her lip. The salty taste of her tears mingled with the metallic tang of blood, creating a bitter cocktail in her mouth. Her face was a canvas of pain and fear, each tear a testament to her suffering. The cut on her lip throbbed with each heartbeat, a constant reminder of the violence she had endured. Her bruises were dark and angry, standing out starkly against her pale skin. She could feel the sting of each injury, a symphony of pain that played in her mind. He leaned close, his voice a raspy whisper. "Don't worry, darling." His breath was hot against her ear, sending shivers down her spine. The words were meant to be comforting, but they only served to heighten her fear. There was a sinister edge to his voice, a promise of more pain to come. She could feel his presence looming over her, a dark shadow that threatened to consume her. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with tension. She could hear the faint rustle of his clothes as he moved, each sound amplified in the silence. This will all be over soon. His words hung in the air, a cruel promise that offered no solace. She wanted to believe him, to cling to the hope that this nightmare would end. But the look in his eyes told a different story. There was a coldness there, a detachment that chilled her to the core. She could see the faint outline of his face in the dim light, his features twisted into a cruel smile. The room seemed to close in on her, the walls pressing in from all sides. She felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of her fear. His words, instead of comforting her, sent a fresh wave of terror through her. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a drum of fear. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, her body's instinctive response to danger. Her mind raced, thoughts tumbling over each other in a frantic attempt to find a way out. She recoiled from him, her body moving on its own, driven by a primal need to escape. The look in her eyes was one of pure terror, a reflection of the nightmare she was living. This was no ordinary kidnapping. This was a calculated act of terror, designed to break her spirit and bend her to his will. The apartment, once a place of safety and comfort, had become a twisted prison. The shadows seemed to move, taking on sinister shapes that danced at the edge of her vision. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, a constant reminder of her captivity. Every sound, every movement was a potential threat. She was trapped in a nightmare with no end in sight. She was ready to take back her life, one step at a time. She was free and nothing could hold her back. She was no longer a victim. She was a survivor. As she ran, she felt a sense of hope rising within her. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she had to get away. She didn't stop to look back. She could hear the man's voice getting louder, and she knew she had to hurry. She turned it slowly, praying it wouldn't make a sound. She inched towards the door, her heart pounding in her chest. With her hands free, she silently moved towards the door, her eyes darting around the room for anything that could help her. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her trembling hands. Sarah's mind raced. She needed to find a way out. The ropes were tight, but she had to try. She wriggled her wrists, feeling the rope loosen slightly. She glanced at the door, calculating her chances. She had to be quick, and she had to be quiet. Her heart pounded as she made her move. Every second felt like an eternity as she worked on the ropes. She could hear the faint sound of the man moving in the next room, his footsteps a constant reminder of the danger she was in. The rope finally gave way, and she felt a rush of relief wash over her. She spotted a small, heavy vase on a nearby table. It wasn't much, but it was something. She picked it up, feeling its weight in her hands, and took a deep breath. She could hear the man talking on the phone, his voice a low murmur. She knew she had to be quick. She reached for the door handle, her fingers trembling. The door creaked open, and she slipped through, her eyes scanning the hallway. She could see the front door at the end, her path to freedom. She moved quickly, her footsteps light on the floor. She reached the front door and fumbled with the lock, her hands shaking. She could hear the man coming closer, his footsteps echoing in the hallway. She finally got the door open and slipped outside. the cool night air hitting her face. She ran, her feet pounding on the pavement, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She could hear the man shouting behind her, but she didn't stop. She kept running, her body fueled by adrenaline and fear. The city streets were dark and empty, but she didn't care. She had escaped. She was free. She had been through hell, but she had survived. She had found the strength to escape, and she knew she could find the strength to keep going. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to face it. The night was dark and full of shadows, but she kept running, her heart filled with determination. She had escaped the nightmare, and now she was ready to reclaim her life. Sarah's escape was just the beginning. She knew she had a long road ahead of her, but she was ready to face it. She had found her strength, and she was ready to fight for her freedom. The dark figure returned, but Sarah was ready. She lunged at him, using all her strength. They struggled, the room filled with the sounds of their fight. She managed to knock him off balance, but he was strong. She had to keep fighting, for her life depended on it. The man regained his footing and swung at Sarah, but she ducked just in time. She used the vase she had picked up earlier, smashing it against his head. He staggered, and she took the opportunity to push him away. Her heart raced as she looked around for an escape route. The front door was still open, but she knew she didn't have much time. The man was already recovering, his eyes filled with rage. She couldn't afford to hesitate. She grabbed a nearby chair and threw it at him, buying herself a few precious seconds. She sprinted towards the door, her legs feeling like lead. Just as she reached the threshold, she felt a hand grasp her ankle. She kicked back with all her might, hearing a grunt of pain behind her. She didn't look back. She couldn't risk it. She burst through the door and into the night, her lungs burning from the effort. She ran, her surroundings a blur. She could hear the man's shouts fading as she put more distance between them. She was almost free. Sarah's mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. She had to find help, someone who could protect her. She couldn't let her guard down, not yet, but she felt a glimmer of hope. She had faced her fear and fought back. She was no longer just running away. She was running towards a future where she was in control. She had confronted her captor and survived. Now she was ready to reclaim her life one step at a time. The night was still dark, but Sarah felt a light within her, a newfound strength and determination. She was free and nothing could hold her back. Her fight wasn't over, but she knew she had the power to win. This was just the beginning of Sarah's journey. She had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. Now she was ready to face whatever came next. She was a survivor, and she was ready to live. The end of one chapter marked the beginning of another. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Sarah knew one thing for sure. She was not alone. As they walked away from the house, Sarah looked back one last time. She had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. The night was still dark, but Sarah felt a light within her, a newfound strength and determination. This was the beginning of a new chapter in her life, a chapter where she wasn't just surviving, but thriving. As they walked towards safety, Sarah felt a sense of peace. Mr. Thompson gave her a reassuring smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Mr. Thompson rushed to her side, helping her to her feet. The dark figure made a break for it, pushing past Mr. Thompson and disappearing into the night. The door burst open and a figure stepped inside. The dark figure hesitated, torn between finishing what he started and escaping before he was caught. Sarah's voice echoed through the night, a desperate plea for help. Just when she thought she couldn't fight anymore, she heard a noise outside. Someone was coming. She screamed, hoping they would hear her. The dark figure panicked, looking towards the door. This was her chance. She had to hold on a little longer. The footsteps grew louder, and she could see the shadow of someone approaching. Her heart pounded, a mix of fear and hope surging through her veins. Sarah seized the moment, grabbing a heavy book from the table and hurling it at him. It hit him square on the chest, causing him to stagger back. "Sarah!" a voice called out. It was her neighbor, Mr. Thompson. Relief washed over her, a lifeline in the midst of chaos. Sarah collapsed to the floor, her body trembling from the adrenaline and exhaustion. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern etched on his face. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You saved my life." "Let's get you somewhere safe," he said. Together they stepped out into the night, leaving the darkness behind. She had faced her worst nightmare and survived. She wasn't alone anymore. Help had come, and with it a glimmer of hope. She had found her strength, and with it the courage to face whatever came next. Sarah was ready to reclaim her life, one step at a time. She was free, and nothing could hold her back. Her fight wasn't over, but she knew she had the power to win. This was just the beginning of Sarah's journey. Now she was ready to face whatever came next. She was a survivor, and she was ready to live. The shadows no longer held power over her. She had found her light, and nothing could extinguish it. And with that knowledge, she stepped forward into the new dawn, ready to embrace the future. Sarah's story was far from over. It was just the beginning of a new, brighter path. She was a survivor, and she was ready to live. Just as Sarah and Mr. Thompson stepped out into the night, the sound of sirens filled the air. The police had arrived. The door burst open, and a group of police officers stormed in. The dark figure tried to flee, but they were too quick. They tackled him to the ground, securing him in handcuffs. Sarah collapsed in relief, tears streaming down her face. She was safe, finally safe. One of the officers approached her, offering a hand to help her up. "You're going to be all right now," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. Sarah took his hand, her body trembling with a mix of exhaustion and overwhelming gratitude. She looked back at the dark figure, now powerless and detained. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaos. "Thank you for saving me." The officer nodded, a slight smile on his face. "It's our job. Let's get you somewhere safe." As they escorted her to the waiting police car, Sarah felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The nightmare was over. The darkness that had once consumed her life was now behind bars. She took a deep breath, the cool night air filling her lungs. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a sense of peace. The journey to recovery would be long, but she knew she had the strength to face it. She had survived the worst, and now she was ready to rebuild her life. With the police by her side and the dawn of a new day on the horizon, Sarah knew she wasn't alone. She had found her light, and it would guide her through whatever came next. This was more than just a rescue. It was a new beginning. And with each step she took, Sarah moved closer to the life she deserved. A life filled with hope, strength, and the unwavering belief in her own resilience. The end of one chapter marked the beginning of another. Sarah's story was far from over. It was just the beginning of a new, brighter path. She was a survivor, and she was ready to live. This was more than just surviving. With each passing moment, Sarah moved closer to the life she deserved, a life filled with hope, strength, and the unwavering belief in her own resilience. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of calm. The sirens faded into the distance, and with them the remnants of her nightmare. She would find a new place to call home, a place where she could feel safe and start fresh. As the ambulance doors closed and it began to drive away, Sarah took one last look at her apartment. She had survived, and she would rebuild her life. Sarah's mind raced with memories of the night's events, the fear, the adrenaline, the relief. The flashing lights of the emergency vehicles cast an eerie glow on the shattered windows and broken door. Sarah sat in the back of the ambulance, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The paramedics checked her over, making sure she was okay. She looked at the apartment building, her home, now a crime scene. The once familiar place felt foreign, almost unrecognizable. She knew it would take time to heal, both physically and emotionally, but she was determined to move forward. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was no longer alone. The support of the police, the paramedics, and even the neighbors who had come out to check on her gave her a newfound sense of community. It was the end of an era, but also the beginning of something new. The scars of this night would fade, and in their place resilience and strength would grow. Sarah leaned back, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. The journey to recovery would be long, but she was ready to face it. This was living, and Sarah was ready to embrace every moment of it. In the weeks that followed, Sarah reflected on her ordeal. She realized how strong she was, how resilient. She joined a support group, sharing her story with others who had been through similar experiences. She found solace in their shared strength, and slowly she began to heal. Each meeting was a step forward, a piece of her old self returning with every shared word and supportive nod. Sarah discovered that in helping others, she was also helping herself. The bonds she formed with her support group became a lifeline, a source of comfort and understanding. She started to see the world differently, appreciating the small moments of joy and the beauty in everyday life. The nightmares became less frequent, replaced by dreams of hope and a future filled with possibilities. Sarah knew that the road to recovery was long, but she no longer walked it alone. With each passing day, she grew stronger, more confident, and more determined to live her life to the fullest. This was her journey, and she was ready to embrace every moment of it. Sarah's story was one of resilience, strength, and the unbreakable human spirit. She had faced her fears and come out stronger on the other side. As she looked towards the future, she knew that no matter what came her way, she had the strength to overcome it. This was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life, a chapter filled with hope, courage, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow.